Is there a difference between operating a practice out in the rural area versus in the city? So today we're going to talk about the differences in servicing client and running a practice out in the rural area versus in city. So having had a practice that was stationed in the city but several satellite offices in the rural Manitoba, I was able to discover that there is a difference between operating a practice out in the city versus out in the country. And as well in discussing those who have a practice out in the country, because I do mentor several practices out in the country, there is a little bit of a different feel. Now, there are a lot of similarities. For example, the people. Well, people are people, so what they care about, what the kind of service they expect and all that is no different in the country as it is in the city. As David Cuttle said, this is true in rural as well as in the country, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that is true regardless of where you have your practice. You're also going to find that the expectations are the same. That is the timeline, the turnover and all of that, and to what degree you're going to provide excellence and caring is going to be about the same in the country as it is in the city. So some of the differences are more along the lines of the role that you're going to play in the country versus in the city. And I do find that if you're going to have a practice out in the country, the role that you're going to play in the community will have a bigger impact. And I find that you could have a practice in the city and the people won't care a whole lot whether or not you do good things for the community, to what extent you are involved in all the committees and all of that. It doesn't really matter much because they won't know and they won't care. But I do find that if you do have an office in a small town, people will notice if you never participate in any of their engagements of the community. So I think it's important that you do a little bit more volunteering, be part of committees and things like that in a rural setting than it is in the city. Now, it is an opinion, and I suspect some of you are going to write to me saying, I don't know what I'm talking about, just as important in the city as it is in the country. But I sincerely believe that it's not. I don't think it's noticed as much in the city as it is in the country. So people, I think, the community will recognize what you do for them more in the country than you do in the city. The other thing I would encourage you to do, for those of you who have, like us, a city office where you service rural areas, I would strongly recommend that you do your very best to inject money back into that community. And I suppose that may come from my farm background and having come from a very small farming community, that money can be a little bit more scarce. So to me, I've always had a soft spot for these small communities, and to me it was important that if I was going to take money out of the community by way of services, that I do my best to inject it back in, so to buy as much as I can in that community, and as much as possible to hire people from that area to, like I said, leave the money into that community as best as you can. The other difference, I think, no doubt, between rural and city is the kind of work you're going to be doing. So obviously, if you have a rural office, you're going to do a lot more farmers and a lot more agricultural kind of businesses. So seed plants and fertilizer and chemical plants and a lot more machinery kind of businesses. So obviously the kind of clients you're going to pick up in the rural area is going to be slightly different than you do in the city. Not huge, but a little bit, and something to be aware of. So following is an interview I had with Howard Wirch. Howard has had a practice out in Dauphin, Manitoba for a number of years, and so he's going to talk about his experience of having a rural office. We have today with me Howard Wirch, who's got a practice out in Dauphin, Manitoba. And so what we're going to do is I want to get his thoughts on a few things related to practice. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, Howard, is about operating in rural Manitoba versus in the city. Because I've done most of my practice in the city, but I do have rural offices, and I do notice that there is a difference. And I wanted to get your take on what it's like to have a rural office versus a Winnipeg office.
Well, I don't know what it's like to operate in the city, so I can only give our perspective as to what it looks like in a rural setting. And I think in the rural setting, maybe the biggest difference is that you kind of have to be all things to all people in practice, which means we're doing a lot of personal tax, a very heavy T1 practice. We do farm, a fair bit of farming in this area, of course, farms and farm corporations. So I would say for the most part, the city practices don't see a lot of farm. Unless you have clients in the rural areas. So that is a significant part of our practice, but we also do small business, small corporation, rollovers, all those tax aspects. We're kind of everything to everybody, but I would say that's probably the biggest difference in practicing here. Our clients are from all walks of life, all different generations. We just see a sampling of everyone.
Yeah, and I think it might be a little bit more difficult to specialize. So in the city, we often see practices that specialize in doing mostly doctors or mostly restaurants or something like that. I think in the rural, well, if you're going to make a specialization of doing only restaurants, you may only end up with only 3 clients.
We specialize in people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, please say so, and we would appreciate you subscribing, and don't forget to work more on your practice than you do in your practice.